Hey, and welcome back to Wild Mythology. I welcome you to my channel with bread and salt. Now, imagine strolling through the hills of Ireland after enjoying a nice pint of Guinness for lunch, when suddenly you hear a loud tapping noise. You follow the tapping sound, and as you get closer and closer, a sweet voice dances on the wind until you stop at a boulder at the base of a hill. You peek your head around the boulder, only to silently gasp as your eyes find a singing 3-foot leprechaun hammering some nails into a shoe. Realizing your situation, your eyes fill with dollar signs. After all, everyone knows about leprechauns and their gold. Jumping at your chance, you leap towards the leprechaun, only to suddenly find a shoe slapping you in the face. As you lie on the ground in pain, a memory of something your grandmother said comes to mind. In dealing with a leprechaun, make sure greed never fills your eyes. Leprechauns are famous supernatural beings from Irish folklore and are usually classified as one of the fairy folk. Unlike most fairies, though, leprechauns are solitary, usually making their homes in underground caves or hollow fairy trees in the country. In modern times, leprechauns are famously recognizable by their green hats and jackets, as well as their red beards and lucky charms. The original appearance of the leprechaun is actually very different from today's commercialized look. Originally, leprechauns were described as old men who stood 2 to 3 feet high. They wore red jackets with several buttons, and on top of their heads sat a cocked hat that could be balanced on when leprechauns felt mischievous. They also wore gray stockings as well as black buckled shoes, and during bad weather they would throw on a brown frieze jacket over their red one to protect themselves. And although most leprechauns weren't overly fond of wearing green back then, one region of leprechaun in Ireland wore a green vest under their red jacket. Other regional variants, though, stuck to red. There were leprechauns that wore a military red coat in the north, leprechauns that used swords as magical wands, and even some jolly fat leprechauns whose face were as red as their coats. The modern description of the leprechaun began to emerge in the United States in the 1800s during the mass migration of Irish immigrants. Over time, the leprechaun's jacket turned from red to green, possibly because Ireland is known as the Emerald Isle. The earliest references to leprechauns in Irish lore comes from a tale known as the Adventure of Fergus, son of Letty. In the story, King Fergus of Ulster falls asleep on the beach. When he wakes up, he finds himself being dragged into the ocean by 3 Leprechauns, an alternate name for the leprechauns. Thinking quickly, King Fergus shakes off his captors and captures the 3 tricksters. Afraid of being the king's captives, the 3 Leprechauns offer the king 3 wishes for their freedom. Now, the meaning of Leprechaun is said to mean small body, which fits the description of the tiny beings. But it's also been suggested to mean small stooping lug, which brings us to the question of where exactly leprechauns came from. Ireland is said to be first settled by the supernatural race known as the Tuatha Dé Danann, the tribe of the gods. Each member was thought to be a god or goddess that represented a domain of life or nature. They were known to live human lives from birth to death, usually as kings, queens, and heroes with supernatural powers. And after their mortal deaths, they would return to being a deity. Eventually, the Tuatha Dé Danann decided to leave the human world for a separate dimension known as the Otherworld. Left behind were their mortal descendants who became the people of Ireland. Their supernatural descendants, though, became the fairy folk, who could jump in between the human world and the otherworld. One of the supernatural descendants of Lugh, the Celtic god of light, oaths, and crafts, became the leprechauns, hence the second meaning of Leprechaun, small stooping Lugh. Another idea is that the leprechauns are defective children of other fairies, and are solitary beings because they were banished from the otherworld. So now that we have some idea of the leprechauns' origins, we can focus on their stories and traits. And the most famous trait of leprechauns is that they love gold. They have the amazing ability of easily finding gold in the earth, and are very good at protecting it. Legend has it that if one is able to capture a leprechaun, they'll have a chance of acquiring his pot of gold. Perhaps this legend adapted from the story I told earlier about King Fergus and his 3 wishes. After the end of rainfall and the appearance of a rainbow, it's said that if one follows the rainbow to its end, it will lead them to a leprechaun and his pot of gold. But like I said, leprechauns are very good at guarding their gold, so it isn't easy acquiring it. They love playing tricks on humans and do so by leaving their gold out in the open. The leprechaun will pretend to fall asleep or walk away from their gold, allowing a human to steal it, not realizing that all they stole was fool's gold. When the human goes to use the gold, it will turn to ash once it's handed away, usually causing problems for the fool. Businesses that are started because of the fool's gold will be cursed with bad luck. And for those that save and store the gold, they will one day come to find that it has disappeared. Another famous trait of leprechauns is that they love music and to dance, just like most of the fairy folk. This also leads to another variation of the leprechaun's name known as Leprechaun, meaning shoemaker. Based on this variation, as well as the ancestry to Lugh, the god of crafts, it was said that leprechauns were the shoemaking cobblers for the fairy folk. You see, the fairy folk danced so much that they were always in need of new shoes, plus they always paid in gold. But shoemaking was also a weakness. Making shoes distracted the leprechaun's attention, and the hammering of nails into the shoes made an echoing sound that drew people to the leprechaun's location. Focused on the shoes, a leprechaun became an easy target to sneak up on. There have been many tales of humans capturing a leprechaun, though only the most clever have walked away without feeling like a fool. Legend has it that the moment after capturing a leprechaun, either by trap or catching it unaware, one should always keep their eyes on the little fairy the entire time. If your eyes stray off the leprechaun for only a moment, you'll find that the fairy has disappeared into thin air. In most stories, a human will squeeze a leprechaun in their hands, asking for either their pot of gold or 3 wishes. The leprechaun will try to trick the human by pointing to where they have hid their gold, causing the human's eyes to stray. Or they will lead the human to a pot of fool's gold. When it comes to the wishes, the human must be careful in their wording. Not being exact can lead to unfortunate situations. But if one is clever enough to navigate through the leprechaun's tricks, they'll be able to get their desires. To this very day, parents and children will build homemade leprechaun traps around St. Patrick's Day to try and catch the tricky fairies. And while a leprechaun isn't usually found in the trap, the fairy will leave a golden chocolate coin or perhaps even a stuffed leprechaun in his place. There's also the town of Carlingford in Ireland, where an annual leprechaun hunt takes place. People from all around the world come and search for 100 chromatic leprechauns hidden around the mountain. It's interesting to point out that there are no known stories throughout history involving female leprechauns, therefore giving us the mystery of how leprechauns reproduce. Perhaps the fact that there are no females supports the theory that leprechauns are the defective children of fairies. Or perhaps female leprechauns never leave the other world and only their male counterparts cross into our world. While we don't have the exact answer for female leprechauns, we do know about 2 other fairies that are cousins to the leprechaun. The first fairy is the Far Darrig, meaning red man. They look like leprechauns except for the fact that they have red hair and beards and are dressed in red from head to toe. They're also sometimes called rat boys because they have dirty hairy skin and are sometimes hiding long snouts and a rat tail underneath their clothing. Like the leprechaun, the Far Darrig is a solitary fairy, but unlike their cousins, the rat boys are cruel and will go out looking to cause mischief. They're known to prowl around the night with a large sack. Once they find a victim, either an adult or child, they'll ambush or trap the human and then stuff them in their sack. With an adult, the Far Darrig will lock them in a dark room and leave them in there for days while laughing maniacally. The human is eventually let go, but is scarred with fear. For a child or baby, the Far Darrig will raise it as a fairy and replace the stolen child with a changeling. Unfortunately for the parents, they never know that their child has been switched out. The second fairy is the Clurichaun, the drunk cousins of the leprechauns. Like their cousins, the Clurichauns are solitary fairies. Because of their great love for alcohol, they spend most of their time lazing around in taverns and wine cellars. They wear similar clothes to their cousins, but have the unique ability to pass through keyholes. While they can be extremely rowdy when drunk, plus a little mischievous towards anyone who tries to steal their drink, Clurichauns are some of the kindest fairies. They are satisfied with the tavern or wine cellar, they will protect the property and the people living there. As long as they aren't bothered and there's plenty to drink, of course. Unfortunately, some of the stereotypes of the leprechaun and the Irish people seem to be connected with the Clurichaun's heavy drinking, laziness, and rowdy behavior. In popular culture, the leprechaun has made some interesting appearances. Without a doubt, the most famous leprechaun in the world has to be Lucky, the noble leprechaun who guards his precious marshmallows from greedy, sugar addicted children. Lucky, who also goes by Sir Charms, became the mascot for Lucky Charms cereal in 1963, and unfortunately has never been able to stop children from stealing his cereal. In sports, the leprechaun appears as a mascot for both the University of Notre Dame in Indiana and the NBA Boston Celtics. In films, some of the most famous portrayals of the leprechaun include the ridiculous 1993 horror slasher film called Leprechaun and its many unfortunate sequels. In the film, a man returns from Ireland to America after stealing a leprechaun's pot of gold. Unfortunately for the man, the leprechaun follows him home. Another portrayal is the Disney Channel original movie, The Luck of the Irish. It's a cute film about a kid who is extremely lucky thanks to his lucky coin. But when his coin is stolen from him, he learns about its heritage and turns into a leprechaun. In order to turn back into a human, he has to find his lucky coin and steal it back. The most famous portrayal, though, comes from 1959's Darby O'Gill and the Little People, produced by Disney. It's a superb film filled with music, dancing, love, wishes, Sean Connery, and King Brian, the Leprechaun King. The film was extremely well received by Americans and has been suggested to be one of the influences on why leprechauns are celebrated on St. Patrick's Day. Definitely recommended. St. Patrick's Day is a holiday celebrating the most famous patron saint of Ireland, as well as Irish culture and heritage. St. Patrick was said to bring Christianity to Ireland, and according to legend was known to explain the Holy Trinity by using a 3-leaf shamrock. The holiday is celebrated on March 17th, the death day for the patron saint. The day also happens during the time of Lent in the Christian religion, a time for fasting. But on St. Patrick's Day, the restrictions for fasting were lifted, so everyone celebrated the day with feasts and drinks. Today, the holiday is the most celebrated national festival in the world, and is famous for its celebration of food, parades, and heavy drinking. So what is the holiday's connection to the leprechauns? Well, the first ever St. Patrick's Day parade was held in 1772 in New York, because Irish immigrants in America missed their homes. So they decided to bring a little bit of their culture and traditions to the colonies. And this is where the connection might come from. After 1772, St. Patrick's Day parades exploded and became extremely popular. With the large batch of new Irish immigrants that came to America in the 19th century, the parades became bigger and bigger. And with them came the stories and folklore of Ireland, including an interesting tale about gold-loving cobblers. On top of this, consumerism has become a huge influence as well. By pushing the image of the leprechaun onto St. Patrick's Day, businesses are able to sell huge amounts of costumes, hats, fake beards, and all types of leprechaun goods. All of this combined with other influences such as films, books, and the connection between Ireland and the color green, caused the story of the leprechaun to adapt and evolve into the St. Patrick's mascot it is today. When it comes to thinking about the myths and folklore of Ireland, a lot of people's minds are going to jump straight to the leprechaun. It has become a symbol and gateway into Irish culture. But even though it's fun to dress up in a green suit for St. Patrick's Day, it is important to understand the leprechaun's origins as a tricky fairy with a love for the color red, gold, and making shoes. Perhaps you'll even go to Ireland someday, and if you're lucky, get a chance to meet a real leprechaun. And there you have it. I give you the wild mythology of the leprechaun from Ireland.